And we are on the air. Welcome all to the southern version of the Global Star Party Live for the 30th of July 2016. I'm joined tonight by Paul Stewart. Some of our usual partners in crime have taken the night off, which is fair enough. Dylan certainly earned a bit of a break from all this, so I will take part in the hosting duties. We are going to be a little bit lean as far as live views are tonight. Paul's struggling a little bit to get his telescope lined up in the night time, and no other volunteers tonight. Personally, I've had some issues with clouds, and so tonight there will be no live views from my telescope at least. So, without any further ado, I will move straight on to the view that Paul has up on his screen, if you don't mind, Paul.
Yep. Not live, because if it was live, it'd be easy to find.
Not live, but the advantage being has had plenty of time to process it and make it look very pretty for us. Hydrogen alpha view of some very long filaments on the sun. Was this taken today? Or?
Yes, it was today's effort before the rain hit. A rough guesstimate, that is about 800,000 kilometres from end to end.
So quite a string there. Did see a few active regions on the wider view of that same image. A few weeks ago, of course, we had no sunspots at all, but you can see there in hydrogen alpha, the active regions show up more as bright spots, and the filaments which don't require active regions to exist, which is why the sun can still be interesting even when it's at minimum. They come up dark and brighter at the limbs where there's no contrast with the underlying chromosphere. So it looks like we've got 3 sunspot groups on the sun at the moment. Those filaments are quite broad. Will they? They'll look quite spectacular as they come around the limb, won't they? If they're coming out far enough, or they have evaporated.
I expect they'll make it to the edge, and they'll probably look quite interesting.
Yeah, look forward to seeing you present images of those as they go around.
Hopefully the clouds will let me.
Now you can also flick, something that the flickr group does nicely there is you can go flick straight from that to the calcium K view that was taken at around the same time. It's easier to see the active regions in white there, that crackly white appearance that they have in the calcium part of the spectrum. Of course, the filaments will disappear.
There's the one and only sunspot.
Yeah, there's those other 2 regions sort of just to up of centre and to the lower left. Are they potential active regions, or because they certainly look bright on the hydrogen alpha?
They're active, but they're not. They don't contain sunspots.
Did they previously, or are these the sort of things that might develop to contain sunspots at some stage?
They may spawn a sunspot. They may not. They might just disappear.
So 1 sunspot. So what are you going to suggest for people who are thinking about buying the solar scope around this time? Wait a few years?
By hydrogen alpha.
Wait for the specials to come out?
Yep. Hydrogen alpha normally shows something. White light won't show you much this time.
It's been a little while since I've put the solar filter on my camera. Usually wait for the big, bad, ugly sunspots to come out before I come out of retirement. But yeah, hydrogen alpha always makes some very interesting shots. And of course, next year, those fortunate enough to be in the continental US probably get the most spectacular images of the solar eclipse that's to pass through there in August with hydrogen alpha scopes, at least during the partial phases. Very nice. So, in the absence of anyone else to bring live views, I might just duck over to the Flickr group because we've had a few people send along images. over the last week, including myself. Never want to feel left out. So I've been at my usual tricks. I don't know if you've got that up on the screen yet, Paul. Or do you want me to screen share that? I'll screen share that for you. So there I'm sharing, hopefully everyone can see, an image I took 2 nights ago of Mars and Saturn. Mars is starting to recede well away from opposition and getting smaller by the day. Still showing plenty of detail if you have a big enough aperture. And of course, at about 85% illuminated, you certainly can see quite a significant shadow on the leeward side of the disk. So nice effect there. Saturn, of course, being a good deal further away than Mars, it never really gets less than 98% illuminated as seen from the Earth. And you can just see a hint of shadow passing around on the left-hand side between the body of the planet and the rings. So moving on to who's next, who's been at it this week. We've got David Blanchflower who's been photographing the moon, a waning crescent, and that would have been last night's moon, judging by the phase. Certainly not a moon that I'm used to seeing, because I'm neither a very early riser or a very late at getting to bed. So waning crescent moons are not something I'm accustomed to. Some familiar landmarks there, but unfamiliar shadowing. You can see Aristarchus crater there, the bright crater there in the corner, with some of my favourite features during the gibbous phase look a little different as the sun shines from the other side. Just around this region here, that would be. Sorry, I'm moving the planet with my cursor there. Yeah, so a nice shot of the moon there. That was taken with a Canon DSLR through a Skywatch Explorer 200. So yeah, not a bad result there. Nice and crisp. There's Paul's hydrogen alpha of the sun with the full disk there in view. They always look lovely. And the calcium K view. And here we are with Remus Romulus. It's a fabulous name. And he shot M11, the wild duck cluster. So called because it looks like a flock of wild ducks. And getting some nice colour in the background stars there. Very rich cluster, very large and rich open cluster there. So let's give them some detail. The richest and most compact of the known open clusters. 250 million years, well, that might seem old to us. Get you around the time the dinosaurs first appeared on the Earth, but by stellar comparison, that's quite a young cluster, hence why it's still so compact. Moving on to Sarah Wager, who I have to say has been absolutely prolific, and wonderful deep sky imaging from Sarah. I think she's only just started making an appearance in Google+, but it's hard to believe that she hasn't been around for a long, long time doing these things. You don't develop the skills with processing and the patience with acquisition overnight with these sort of images that she's been presenting. Absolutely brilliant. I've been very impressed with what she's been putting out. And here we go, a possible, probable supernova. I didn't actually check this one up. So where are we here? July 26th. And And where are we? From Siding Spring in New South Wales, Australia. So discovered by the All Sky Automated Survey for Supernovae. And where are we? Now you see me, now you don't. So that's the object in question down there where my cursor is at the moment. Don't know about those coordinates. I'm not exactly sure where we're looking at, but it's in the constellation of Hydra. Looks like it's part of a small galaxy there. That blur is presumably a distant galaxy of some kind, and with supernova contained within that. Now that's a good show. And Joseph Brimacombe trying to show us Mars, Saturn, and the Milky Way. So a long exposure around the core of the Milky Way. You can see Saturn just off to the side there. Oh, hang on. So that'll be Mars just off to the side there. Antares over there, and Saturn in that spot there. Less bright than both Antares and Mars, and a little duller in colour. So yeah, that's what I would have been out taking shots of tonight had there not been the clouds suddenly appear immediately before the star party. It's off on the way. Half an hour from now, I'm sure it'll be completely clear out there. So where did he take this from? This was taken from Savannah Skies Observatory, so southern USA would be my guess. And really popped the colours in the Milky Way there. The Canon 5D. So moving along to who have we got next? And Remus Romulus again, not deep sky this time. This time he's gone the old-fashioned webcam. So back in the day, before all these cheap planetary astro imaging setups were available, the old system was to deconstruct a webcam, take the lenses off a webcam, and somehow gaffer tape that to your telescope and take the video that way. There's a very good result he's got there with that setup, the Skywatch 150. So, you know, not a bad result from a refractor there with a relatively small power. And what's Devon Boggs been up to? Photographing storms. It's a nice shot there with some lightning center shot, Milky Way above, and storm clouds in the distance over the water. Must have been a sight to see at the time. Certainly has done a nice job of catching that. Wonder how long he waited for that lightning strike. And Paul Hutchinson. What's he been up to? The Eastern Veil Nebula with his Skywatcher Explorer and Canon camera. And he's also applied a little astrometry.net to that. Give us the NGC codes. It's a lovely nebula, completely invisible from where I sit in Australia, but it's one of the ones that I do envy of the Northern Hemisphere observers and astrophotographers. Of course, it's an old supernova remnant in Vela. Quick, Paul, help me. Supernova remnant in Cygnus. No, lost my mind. So, going on then to some video from our Paul Stewart. Now, I'll let this run and let it speak for itself. I would say that was a seagull.
I'm assuming it is a seagull. It didn't stop and identify itself.
Suppose you're not too far off the water there, are you?
You see seagulls around, so most likely a seagull.
So good timing you had anyway. Makes a change from the usual airplanes that people pick up while they're taking these sort of shots.
Never had an airplane.
Not yet. You
No.
need to move closer to an airport.
We don't really have airplanes down this end of the island, I don't think.
You could really make a name for yourself and have the ISS pass across the screen.
I wish I could organise that.
Well, you'd have to talk to Dylan about that. He seems to make a regular habit of it. Now, where are we? Where are we back to date-wise here? July 24th. So we're coming to the end of the week that was. That last big active region you caught just passing around the edge there. And again in hydrogen alpha. And there are those filaments we're looking at today just coming around the limb now. Would that be correct?
Yeah, I would guess they are actually.
It was only 3 or 4 days ago there. And Paul Hutchinson looking from the other side of the world, not upside down, and that will be the same active region in white light, I believe, with a beta solar filter is used there. So in white light, the same active region 2565 and 2567 passing around the limb out of view. Thank you, Paul Hutchinson. And Steve Brown was lucky enough to be able to hide the sun behind a tree so that he could catch this lovely sun halo. Atmospheric effect, of course, from ice crystals and typical radiant 22-degree sun halo you can see there. And a few clouds in the foreground. It's a lovely shot. The tree sets that off nicely. Thank you, Steve. And now we're starting to get back to a bit earlier. I think they would have covered these in the Northern Hemisphere star party. So these evenings with you. Oh, hang on. Paul has got a live view. You managed to find something, Paul?
I think I've got everything pointing right now.
You've slewed the scope at, well, you can tell us.
It should be the Lagoon Nebula.
Well, it certainly looks a lot like it. You could just hold the scope still for just a moment. Oh, there it is. Yeah, the Lagoon Nebula. In Sagittarius. The so-called hourglass nebula there is named by one of the Herschels way back when. And this is through a filter. This is through red, is it? Or is this hydrogen alpha, or is this just a luminance filter?
There's a straight luminance through my guide cam. It's the quickest thing I could throw in there tonight.
The guide cam. What's the guide cam you're running? That's a great shot.
That's a little Starlight Express Lodestar with a 0.8 focal reducer on it.
Yeah, I'd be happy to get that as a live view through my main scope. So what could we say about the Lagoon Nebula? Big hydrogen alpha region in Sagittarius, large star forming region. Much bigger, of course, than what we can see in this view. It extends for quite probably a degree, actually probably half a degree. So it's about as big as a full moon if you get the whole lot of it in there. But most of it's quite dim. This central core region is visible with the naked eye. If you're in a nice dark area, you'll be able to see the Lagoon Nebula. If you avert your vision just a little bit, possibly. With a telescope there, you start to see the sort of details that stand out there, that large dark band running through, obscuring some of the background hydrogen emission. a very rich part of the sky at the moment, in the southern hemisphere at least. Very good views through the whole Scorpio, Sagittarius, Corona Australis. Some very good selection of globular clusters, open clusters, emission, reflection, the galactic core, galaxies, especially if you're looking more southward. So it's a very good time of year in the south. Good selection of targets to get out there and shoot some fish in a barrel. So if you haven't got a telescope, at the moment we're lucky enough to have all 5 visible planets. If you get out early after sunset, you'll see Venus low down on the horizon. It'll be quite bright and remain quite bright all through its phase as it reaches maximum elongation, I think in January. And just above it at the moment is Mercury. A bit fainter, you have to wait for the sky to get a little bit darker before Mercury becomes easily visible. Jupiter, of course, is still quite bright in the western sky, and further up, depending on if you're in the southern hemisphere, just about overhead at the moment, or if you're in the northern hemisphere, down on the southern horizon, will be Mars and Saturn, as we've shown you in some of those Milky Way shots. So if you get out early enough in the evening, you should be able to see all 5 of them in one catch. Won't be able to do that again for a couple more years. 2018, I believe, is the next time that happens. And it'll be that way for a little while until Mercury and Venus and Jupiter have their conjunction a bit later on this month. They'll form a nice little pattern, especially with the early crescent moon at around that time. So that's something to watch out for in the early evening sky. If you have a nice clear western horizon, Mars and Saturn will be up for most of the evening, which is good. And if you're very keen and looking for a challenging target, Neptune and Uranus both make appearances later in the evening. And Uranus is a difficult target for a high power objective. Venus is a dot. I think doesn't matter how big your telescope is. Neptune is just a dot in even the biggest aperture telescopes. So like with Pluto, just finding it is enough of a challenge. Imaging it is, may as well not bother challenge as far as I'm concerned, but I'm sure there'll be those who disagree and would add it to their collection. Now, if you have any of Neptune in your collection there, Paul?
Don't think so.
Now, Uranus is always good because you get the opportunity to catch the moons at different orientations around the planet, as you do with Saturn, because it's inclined at such a steep angle to the ecliptic that the planets don't move in the same line as they do with the Galilean moons of Jupiter. They move virtually in a circle around Uranus, and so each night you can see them at a different angle to the planet. Good, maybe not a good observing challenge because they're not the sorts of things you're going to be able to see through your telescope eyepiece, but for the images out there, it's a good challenge to get out and see how many moons of Uranus you can bag in one sitting. So I think that's about all I had to offer tonight, in the absence of any live views from any other volunteers, or unless you've got a firm handle on your telescope alignment, you can point us in the direction of perhaps the Trifid Nebula, which is nearby and quite bright.
Yep.
How about that? Ask and ye shall receive. So in monochrome through a luminance filter, you don't get to see the opportunity to see the difference in shading. Dylan O'Donnell posted a few days ago a very nice image of the Trifid Nebula in full color, which I can highly recommend you get on and see, either on his Google+, Twitter, Facebook, on his own webpage, geography.com. But here we see center stage, the Trifid Nebula, so-called, of course, because it's divided into 3 sort of lobes by that dark nebula in front and above the bright star there. That's all hydrogen emission through that region. Off to the left, you can see a fainter region of nebulosity, which in color is actually a blue-colored reflection nebula. And so that's neutral hydrogen that's just lit up and reflecting light from the foreground stars, whereas the emission nebula glowing red is actually ionized hydrogen, showing its typical pattern of reionization in the red color there. So that's quite close by the Lagoon Nebula. And again, I think if you have a dark enough sky and a oh, is that Dylan's photo or is that one of yours?
It's Dylan's. I don't think he'll mind us showing it off.
I'm sure he will not. He was quite proud of this because it was one of the few occasions he was doing deep sky imaging without his hyperstar on. So he would have actually had to spend some time acquiring subs for this instead of just flicking the camera on and off again and publishing a nice photo. So you can see this is oriented the opposite way to the live view Paul was just showing. So with the hydrogen alpha emission nebula part of it to the left and the reflection nebula off to the right, and some very he's getting some nice detail in the dark nebula, particularly to the bottom of the image there. The dark nebula showing up really nicely. I didn't catch the details of how long the subs were for this exposure, but he really has done a nice job with the color balance, I think.
He says he has 100 minutes on this.
100 minutes. God, that's just great, isn't it? And that's without the hyperstar. So there's no wonder Celestrons picked him as one of their show ponies, because he really does know what to do with that beast. That's with a C9.25 edge, I think. Edge HD he's got there. And he's using a QHY9 camera, I think. Is that you've got the data there, haven't you?
QHY 12.
12. So quite capable set of cameras, QHY.
6.3 focal reducer.
Yeah, it was quite a big chip on that camera, as I recall, but the focal reducer obviously buys you a lot of time. So otherwise he'd be imaging at f10, which will take a lot more. He'd need a lot more than 100 minutes. With his hyperstar, I think he's at f2 point something ridiculous. And he just takes 1 minute subs and puts a half a dozen together and you get something like that, but a much wider field of view.
Cheating.
It is cheating. I agree, and given that Dylan's not here to defend himself, we can agree on that. Is that this astrophotography should be time consuming. You should need to spend hours out in the cold. It's just not fair when someone goes out there and can just get out there and shoot target after target in any one night. It's not right. Not right. So that is a lovely photo, though. I wish I could get something like that one day. I will invest in some deep sky astrophotography gear. Until then, I'll stick with my solar system stuff. Get the big planets. Got Venus coming up as it's reaching into the evening sky and starting to show a nice face to us. I'm hoping to bring a little bit of that along. And Jupiter's a bit too low down on the horizon now for imaging. Still good as a visual spectacle, but not much good for imaging. The atmospheric distortions just ruin it. Mars is getting too small. Saturn is good. Oh, here we go. That is the Omega Nebula, M17, if I remember rightly. So that's not in Sagittarius. I think that's in Scutum. No.
Must be just on the border between Sagittarius.
I think it's just out. I could stand corrected, but another
It's
hydrogen just inside. So another hydrogen alpha star forming region. Again, all these images, all these nebulae we've seen tonight from Paul are all in the same sort of vicinity, in the sort of 5,000 to 7,500 light year range. So it's quite a productive area of the Milky Way galaxy. And the Omega Nebula, or checkmark nebula, if you tilt your head, if you turn that image 90 degrees counterclockwise, you can see it's sort of like a check mark. It's also known as the Swan Nebula. If you imagine, you can see the swan pointing or swimming up to the left of the corner there, left corner of the image there. So it's a very pretty, sometimes overlooked nebula, because it's not only close to the Lagoon and Trifid that we just saw, but also close to the Eagle Nebula. That wasn't intended to be a hint, Paul, but just in case you were wondering, the Eagle Nebula nearby that contains that iconic Pillars of Creation that the Hubble telescope made famous very early on in its career. So it gets overlooked a bit because it's surrounded by all these great visual and photographic nebula that people just love to capture and post photos of, and just a beautiful part of the sky. Very, very nice. Yes, you're doing well for someone who wasn't sure what the telescope was pointing at early on. And this is all again through your guide scope. That's marvelous. I saw, Paul, I don't know if you've seen the ads for the Attic Infinity model, which is a new purpose-built camera for showing live views for live star parties generally.
Seen it, I haven't read about it as yet.
Yeah, something a lot of the companies appear to be doing is targeting to the star party market, rather than having people line up to have a look down the eyepiece for a couple of minutes. Have a camera that just plugs straight into your scope, straight onto your laptop, and you can have a dozen people standing around all looking at the image at once. Oh, there it is. So here we are, the Eagle Nebula. Now this one is not in Sagittarius, that I am certain. And you can see there showing quite nicely the three fingers of the Pillars of Creation there that you see in close up, the open cluster that's associated with the nebula. And in longer exposures, you can even imagine an eagle with the wings spread out around the central dark nebula there, but the wings spread out on either side and the head up where the open cluster is vaguely reminiscent of an eagle. Though I'd have to say astronomers of yesteryear had much more vivid imaginations than I. So that's very good. So again, another hydrogen alpha region. So in color photos, you'll see that glowing a deep dark red. And lots of new stars around there, so lots of blue stars to contrast with the red nebula. So what else have we got close around that region? Now, I don't know if anyone was up late last night or the night before watching the Delta Aquariids meteor shower that is occurring currently. We're sort of past peak now, so you might have missed the best of it, but generally speaking, it's not one of the brighter meteor showers. And a low zenithal hourly rate. I think it was peaking at something like 3 per minute, one every 3 minutes, which you need a little bit of patience when it's cold outside to sit and wait for. Coming up for our northern friends is the Perseid meteor shower. That's going to peak in a couple of weeks' time. Paul and I both miss that because we are way too far south to catch it at its peak. But for our northern hemisphere viewers, that's something to keep an eye out. I think 14th is when the Perseids peak. Now that looks to me like it's going to be a globular cluster. Hard to pick which one it might be. Could be Omega. It could be the Omega Nebula, but that is the Omega Nebula, is it?
It's the globular cluster.
It's the globular cluster, the Omega Nebula, Omega Centauri. So the Great Omega Centauri Nebula. No, the Great Omega Centauri cluster. The Omega Centauri, the largest globular cluster in the sky, bar none. Much larger than that M13, that little thing up in Hercules. And a special gem reserved for the southern hemisphere. Some debate about whether this one actually started as a globular cluster of the Milky Way galaxy or a small dwarf galaxy that got stripped of all but its core and then got captured by the Milky Way. But it's big, visible to the naked eye. Even in suburban lights, I can see it with the naked eye here. And even with a pair of binoculars, it's easy to resolve some of the stars out on the fringe. So it's always a good one for star parties to get people oohing and ahhing. And not too far away from Omega Centauri is Centaurus A. Not asking too much, Paul, I know. Just looking at my maps on the phone here to see where you can zoom to next, but I think you should still be able to get a good look at Centaurus A. It's quite a bright galaxy and characterized by a very dark band across the center. There we go. So it's probably the result of a merger between a spiral galaxy and oh, there we are. You can just see there as Paul's scanning across. There's a dark band which is not very. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So you can see the dark band across the center there. That's more typical of a spiral galaxy, but it's not. Well, it's not typical of what we normally see with an edge-on spiral galaxy, something like the Needle or even the Sombrero galaxy in Virgo is a less obvious contender for that. So it looks like it's a merger between two galaxies, one with a prominent dark band and another more a rounded elliptical sort of galaxy. But a very bright radio source and one of the brightest radio sources in the sky. So whatever's going on there is very active. So that's Centaurus A. Not in the local group. It's a bit further off than the local group of galaxies. Oh, that was the other thing I meant to mention. Emmanuel Conseil didn't post it to our group, but there's a nova for those who can see the Andromeda galaxy from their location easily. There's a nova going on in the Andromeda galaxy. looks like it's a recurrent nova, which has been confirmed and rejoices in the name of PNV J00430400 plus 4117079, because astronomers are so imaginative. And Emmanuel has taken a photo of that with the slow robotic telescope. We'll just, while Paul is slewing his telescope, I'll just screen share that. And could you put that up on the screen, my screen share, Paul? Very faint nova, so it's only going to be for the very keen among you.
Yeah, can't see it yet.
Am I sharing? I'm not sharing. Why am I sharing? Ah, there we go. That's more like it. So sharing there now. So it doesn't come in at a high magnitude, but for the keen among you who like chasing novae and supernovae, there's one right there, close to home. It's been a long time since we have one in our own Milky Way galaxy, so we have to, for the most part, rely on distant galaxies. And M31, not so distant, but unfortunately not a supernova, just a nova, and looks like it's a repeat event from another one that happened in the same location about 9 years ago. So back to Paul, who's, oh, I didn't, is that's a live view we got now? Oh, that's
Yep.
right. I keep forgetting how far south you are. I can't see this from where I am at the moment. So the Tarantula Nebula, within and adjacent to the Large Magellanic Cloud. So the largest star-forming region in the local area of our region, not even in our galaxy. So it's quite a prominent nebulosity from Earth to see from where we are. Can imagine how spectacular it would be if you were nearby to it. So just a massive ionized hydrogen alpha region there with a very dense young open star cluster at the center. Tends to come up a bit green in a lot of the images that I've seen, whether that's a fault of the processing or if it really does have a bit of a more green tinge because of the distance. I'm not sure, but it always seems to come up not as vividly red as the other star-forming regions more close by. Very good. So you really are holding the fort very well for us, Paul. Maybe we only need one live scope each time. So that one's the Tarantula number, or 30 Doradus. As a lot of these nebulas, including including Omega Centauri, these are nebulae that have names that would conventionally be given to stars, and that's because early on, before they were recognized to be what they actually are, they were mistaken for stars and named as such. So this one started with the name 30 Doradus. It now has an official NGC name and nickname, the Tarantula Nebula, but 30 Doradus was its original designation. So there's a few around the place like that where we think it's something and then it turns out to be something far more interesting. And so here we are with another globular cluster, although this one is going to be the one that is nearby another one. Well, this is another case in point of what I was just saying. This is 47 Tucanae. Am I correct there, Paul?
You are.
Yep, 47 Tucanae in the constellation Tucana. It's a toucan. And this one's close in proximity visually to the small Magellanic Cloud, but not contained within the small Magellanic Cloud. It's a globular cluster of the Milky Way galaxy. Again, another one that was so bright to be at first mistaken for a star, which is better than being mistaken for a comet, like all of the Messier objects have been. But 47 Tucanae, given that designation, it now has an official NGC designation, as all non-stellar deep sky objects do. But still keeps its old nickname of 47 Tucanae because it's an easier one to remember than the 4-digit NGC number. It's a much smaller globular cluster than Omegas. This is all the same focal length, isn't it, Paul? Much, much smaller than Omega Centauri visually, but still one of the top, I think it's, is it second or third brightest globular cluster in the sky?
I think it's number 2. It still beats the Hercules cluster.
Still, push back Hercules to number 3. Those Northern Hemisphere observers, they don't know what they're missing. But there you have it, 47 Tucanae. So looking at toward the small Magellanic Cloud there. So again, this time of year, invisible from this part of Australia. It's below my horizon at the moment, but Paul's lucky enough to be nearly Antarctic. So just all these things are just whizzing around above him, which is just brilliant. There, so it must be visible for you all year round then, all this region.
Yeah, pretty much. Neighbours cut down the tree that was on the road, so it's fair game now.
Excellent. You didn't pay him a cent for that, I'm sure.
Of course not.
So that's just fabulous. And what I can't believe at this late stage of the evening is that we've managed to pad out nearly an hour with just Paul and I. No Dylan. He's not even piping in to defend himself. So hardly a word about Celestron the whole evening. That's what is your weapon of choice these days? Are you still using the Williams optics, or?
Yep, this is the Williams Optics 132mm we're using tonight.
That's the one that this guide scope is parked on.
The guide camera is plugged into the back of it. Yep.
It gives a good field of view, doesn't it? And you're doing all your solar through the Lunt 80.
That's mounted on the side of it too.
On the side there, and you've put the LX200 into retirement. Is that how it stands at present?
Yeah, it's gone back inside until another planet decides to put on a show.
Yeah, but you're getting some good planetary views just with the Williams optics. You're getting some. You're doing some Saturn through that, I thought. Mars would be a hard target for it.
Yeah, it performs well for a little scope.
Yeah, but 132 is quite a big refractor, though, isn't it?
It's reasonable, yeah.
Well, I think that's being modest. 130mm is a massive refractor for mine. I mean, most people are out there busily being disappointed by 50mm refractors. It's only when they get a really high quality optic and a nice big aperture that you really see what they can do, and they are quite handy little telescopes. I do like my Schmidt-Cassegrain though. Does limit somewhat though, with the field of view being so small. I can barely fit Omega Centauri into my field of view with the camera that I currently have. Even with a f3.3 focal reducer on there, it still isn't big enough to catch the whole cluster inside the field of view. So that's where the refractors really come into their own. Nice wide field of views, and the optics are such now, the triplet optics are such that there's just no chromatic aberration whatsoever, even out to the edges. So we live in a blessed age of astronomy, don't we? Especially the amateur equipment that's available to us now. Dig out an old copy of Burnham's Celestial Handbook and see some of the Palomar images that were recorded in there on film. And I can hardly name anyone in my circle of astrophotography compatriots who isn't getting better pictures consistently than what the professionals were getting, 50 years ago. So we've got Paul slewing his camera around again, slewing the scope around again. Hopping from object to object. See if I can pick the next one.
I can't get the next one that you think I probably would. It's just too low.
Yeah, no, that's all right. See if I can guess what you're aiming at. Are we trying for the Carina Nebula?
I was, but the scope ended up pointing at the computer monitor, so it didn't sort of work.
Yeah, that's not going to be. Yeah, that's not going to do well. Let's not be knocking over any equipment tonight. So,
unless you can suggest something, I think I've run out of ideas.
Can you get to the jewel box? That should be up high enough for you. It's just a little open cluster. Might not be as pretty in monochrome as it is in color. It's one of those little clusters that looks really pretty visually. So there's not too many objects in the sky that I prefer to see down an eyepiece, but the open clusters are a group of objects that they just sort of glitter better when you to see the twinkle down the eyepiece, which you just don't appreciate when you're doing long exposure astrophotography. So trying desperately to recognize some of the star patterns that are coming up on the screen there, but drawing nothing. Well, there it is. Lovely. It's a little triangular shaped jewel box. Now the bright star at the center, well, the bright star to the right of the triangle, the base of the right base of the triangle there is a really deep red color compared to the other stars, which are sort of whitish bluish, and it makes this little cluster, well, gives it the name jewel box. I think again, one of the Herschels, who were prolific in discovering and naming the southern sky objects that Messier missed, they gave it the nickname the jewel box cluster because it was just like a pretty collection of jewels. And this is very close to the Southern Cross, very close in fact to Beta Crucis, and an easy one to find with a pair of binoculars because of its proximity to the cross, which is for the southern observers, it's a hallmark of the southern sky. It's one of those things that you can't miss. So there it is, the jewel box cluster. And there's a few others around that region that are all very tightly packed open clusters. There's the gem cluster, and there's another one that's also nearby called, no, doesn't come to me now, but all very tightly packed, pretty open clusters, all with very poetic nicknames, and all well worth a look if you have a simple pair of binoculars, or even a relatively small and cheap telescope that you just point and look. It doesn't need a go-to function. If you can jump from star to star, you can usually find most of these objects without too much scurrying around the sky. So what's he trying to show us now?
I was looking for the coal sack, but being a dark nebula, it's going to be a little bit hard to find.
It's a big black empty spot in the sky. So yeah, that's one that shows up nicely on wide exposure photos. You can just see this gap missing in the Milky Way, just below, between delta and, just refresh here. No, it is between alpha and beta Crux, the Coal Sack Nebula, and just a big gap missing. You can see it in dark skies if you've got a good view of the southern Milky Way where you are. It's usually quite obvious just to the naked eye. It'd be a hard thing to draw out in short focal length telescope. It's just notable by its absence of stars rather than the wealth of stars contained within. What else is there? We've got a couple of minutes there. No, I think we've fulfilled our quota of live deep sky objects tonight. I think you've done a very fine job chasing these things around the sky. Hope I did a reasonable job at describing them for the viewers. And reminder once again, the new moon coming. So while the skies are clear and the sky is dark, get out there and just lie under the stars, or get a pair of binoculars, or set up a telescope if you must, and get out there and see some things. Catch the Perseids in a couple of weeks' time. Make sure you get out there and see all the visual planets while you still can. Saturn still looks big and bright and ringy, and Mars is still very bright, and if you've got a decent sized aperture you can still see plenty of detail, particularly if you use a red filter. Jupiter's getting a bit low on the horizon now, but you certainly still will be able to see the bands in the clouds, and the Galilean moons doing their dance for some time yet. And watch out for Venus as it rises out of the western horizon and becomes the evening star and dazzles us once again with lots of UFO reports. So it is on the hour of 1300 UTC, and at that we shall draw it to a close. So until the Northern Hemisphere hangout in a week's time, and we'll catch up again in another couple of weeks, weather permitting. Okay, thank you, Paul, for joining us.
Thank you for hosting.
No, always a pleasure, and look forward to seeing everyone back again this time in a couple of weeks. Okay. Bye for now.